there. That's what we're waiting for. Okay. So our topic for today is initiating systems development. So it's not really a long topic or a long chapter, but as I said a while ago, this is a not really neglected topic or or it's a consideration that hasn't been given very significant importance or attention that we realize in the course of our own experience, neglecting to do even the more basic ones at these stages or in these fields or in these topics can actually lead into problems later on in the future, right? So you realize that if you don't properly initiate the project or the topic that needs to be done, or initiate the systems that need to be done, you realize that you'll have some complications in the long run. So in this case, what do we mean by initiation or the startup phase? So in practical terms, this is the first phase of an information systems development project. Okay. And the aims are to establish whether the project is feasible and prepare to ensure the project is successful. Now, uh, sometimes, especially those who feel that they have the most talent, tend to neglect having a deliberate initiation or startup phase, wherein you make some assessments whether it is actually feasible to come up with that particular system, right? And sometimes uh, some developers, if not okay, I mean some developers fail to do this, right? But some developers also think they do this, but they don't do it in a structured manner. So as such, they tend to miss out very important things when they assess the feasibility of a project. Okay. Now, one of the outcomes in this phase is actually coming up with a feasibility study. Now, the feasibility study is an activity that occurs before the requirements determination stage. So this is way before us trying to understand what are the requirements for the system, right? And this requirements determination, typically we get that from the key users, right? But even before that, you also want to do some sort of a study, uh, whether the project that you have in mind with its principles would really fit what the company is looking for. So we'll talk more about the different types of feasibility. Okay? But uh, a feasibility study typically happens way before we have an idea of what the requirements are. Okay. And the idea of why we want to do feasibility studies because we want to determine whether it is a viable business proposition. Take note that we're not talking about the technical aspects yet, okay, not its entirety, okay, but primarily whether it makes sense from a business standpoint, whether you should be doing that particular system, okay. And included in the feasibility report is analyzing the need for and the impact of the system. So in theory, okay, you have an idea of what the system does. You try to project the benefits and also the costs that the system would incur, right? But more the benefits, the impact that system would do in the overall landscape of your organization. And then it is also in the feasibility study wherein you should have considered different alternatives in acquiring software or other solutions that are aimed to actually solve the same problem that you really want to look into. So now we go back to an earlier topic about identifying the problem that you'd want to solve or you'd want the system to address. Okay, so okay, take note that the feasibility study is the primary outcome of the initiation or startup phase. Now, why do we want to do project initiation? Uh, and this is where most people tend to tend to they fall short here. I mean, they think that initiation is kana yan, parang kick-off lang yan. Di ba? Para, let's just do some sort of a fancy event to signify symbolically that we're going to start a project. But they fail to realize the more practical and vital reasons why you'd want to properly do a project initiation. Well, first, capability. A new information system can provide new capability to achieve something that has not been previously been possible. Now, if you'd think in theory that a new system can provide new capability to your overall organization that hasn't been there before, then that might be good. Okay, that's a good enough reason. Okay. Now, what's another reason for trying to embark on a project, systems development project? Well, cost savings. And this is the more typical reason. Like, we want to be able to save up costs, let's say on labor, or save costs on wastes. Okay, we talked about waste in the previous session. Uh, so this is something obvious, and you'd probably expect more often than not, maybe 8 out of 10 times, the reason why a project is being proposed is the fact that you want to benefit from saving up costs when that system is already up and running. Okay. Another reason why you'd want to take on a project or have a project to develop a system is, well, improved internal information flows and also improved external information flows. So you want the flow of information to be more efficient, to make sense really. Um, the opposite of an improved information flow would be having noise, right? You don't want to have too much noise when it comes to information. You might have information, you might be inundated with a lot, uh, but knowing for a fact that you probably don't need that, you don't need those sets of information, right? But in a traditional sense, the reason why you want to improve internal information flows is that, okay, maybe the systems that are already in place, they do not have the linkages necessary to facilitate efficient and effective communication, okay, across the organization. And typically, this happens if your organization is always undergoing reorganizations and the like. Okay, it does happen. Uh, well, from an external information flows point of view, well, you also have your external value chain to consider. What are examples of this? Your customers, number one. You'd like to get to know your customer more. Okay. You also like to get to know your vendors more, your suppliers. Okay. Those are examples of people or parties that are outside of your respective organizations. And they're critical also for your business to function well. Now, other reasons would be improved customer service. So this is more very specific to customer service, right? Uh, Customers are also more likely to respond favorably to an organization when they have confidence in the accuracy of the information held about them and their business transactions. You see, more than doing things efficiently or effectively, when you're dealing with customer service, a very important currency in that aspect is relationship, the trust that the customer has about you, right? Uh, Unless your business is pretty much one off, right? Meaning, I go purchase something from you and I don't do that anymore for a very, very long time. I mean, those are one off situations. Okay? But if you are a company that really depends on repeat buys from existing customers, then chances are, I mean, you definitely want to be able to serve your customer better. And for you to be able to serve your customer better, then you need to have a better understanding of who your customers are, right? Uh, and that improves the confidence of your customers towards you as their company of choice. Now, another reason why systems have to be developed would be changes in regulation or legislation, new laws that get passed. Okay? Uh, we see this very prevalent in the US. In the Philippines, I think the biggest law in recent years that really changed the dynamics of systems would be the Data Privacy Act, I think, of 2012. Prior to that, you had the cyber law, cybersecurity law. But it's not just that. It's not just cybersecurity law. The E-commerce Act, rather. So I think that was the biggest. But the E-commerce Act was sometime in the early 2000s. So we're talking of like 20 years ago, more or less, right? But in the Western world, in the US, for example, or even in Europe, there are a lot of changes in terms of law. And you see this in a lot of the platform announcements. They say that they have changed or updated their terms and conditions. They actually ask you to make sure that you've read the updates. Uh, and you see that these are all driven by changes in law. Okay. And that's also a very perfect reason, in fact, a very important reason why you want to come up with a system, okay, or initiate a project in that regard. Okay. Another reason why you want to have a new system is improving your responsiveness. Okay. So here, organizations are increasingly competing on the basis of the speed with which they respond to the changing internal and external business environment. Okay. Uh, in a way, this is uh, paying homage to the fact that you want to improve your efficiency, right? So if your organization is highly responsive, very very quick reaction times, turnaround times cut in half, for example, I mean, you'd expect business to be better. In fact, an increased rate of responsiveness actually helps in scaling the company, right? If you're able to cut down on the turnaround times, then you can actually do more and produce more. So it does help in the scalability of your organization. Now, another reason for us to start a project would be reach, expanding your market base. And not only that, when we talk about reach, we are really talking more about the network of the organization. So you knowing that your company is like uh, uh, a vital piece in a larger network of pieces, right? If you have a system that can help manage the relationships, okay, we've talked about that earlier, about your customers, about your vendors, about your suppliers, and making sure that you can actually reach more of them, okay, not only the existing ones, but even for those that you haven't really dealt with yet, right? So that would actually be helpful for you. That would actually help your business grow. Okay. Control, this is in relation also to efficiency. Control can be improved through better information delivery for managers. So this is really more geared towards management tackling. Okay. And well, another reason for coming up with a new system is competitive advantage. Okay. But this is more like a blanket category, wherein if you've done everything else, perhaps in the previous reasons, if you have so many of those reasons ticked off, the reason why you want to have this system, then you can be sure that you can have that competitive advantage that we're talking about. Okay, and that's probably good for business. It's probably good for you. Okay. Now let's go into the aspect of the feasibility study. So there are actually four types of feasibilities that you want to consider when you're in the initiation stage. Okay, you take a look at organizational feasibility, economic feasibility, technical feasibility, and operational feasibility. And more often than not, when people are engaged in development projects, they tend to only look maybe at the economic or technical. I mean, that's to be expected. Okay, but not all of them really take stock of the fact that there has to be some sort of organizational feasibility and operational feasibility. Okay? Let's take a look at them one by one. So for organizational feasibility, what do we mean by this? Okay. Well, it reviews how well the solution meets the needs of the business. Okay. And anticipates problems such as hostility to the system if insufficient training occurs. Uh, considers the effects of change given a company's culture and politics. So you'd always want to look how a system actually impacts the existing culture, okay, or social political landscape of the organization. Okay. Uh, Back in the old days, that is something that people would laugh at. Like, how can a technical stuff like a system, an information system, be of any any use, no? Or yeah, to a company's culture. How does it really impact uh, the non-technical aspects of the organization? But you realize later on, okay, over the years that yes, organizations would need to, in a way, absorb and embrace any new system that's going to be implemented in their organization. Okay, so even culture, right, even politics, and we've seen this so many times in a lot of organizations, right? That if if the senior management of an organization wouldn't want um, a system to be rolled out, then chances are that system will not be rolling out, right? So you also take a look at in those angles, right? Would this system be something that senior management would buy into, right? And a lot, I wouldn't say few. I mean, there are a lot of cases, a lot of projects that have failed because they failed to understand and appreciate the dynamics of the organization, particularly that of senior management. Now, when we look at organizational feasibility, well, these are the two things that we want to look into, right? Alignment of the systems to the business strategy. Okay, if it doesn't align to the strategy, then your system doesn't really make sense. And the impact of the system on the organization. So, okay, will the people inside the organization embrace the new system? Now, going back to the earlier point about alignment with strategy, this is why in very large organizations, the concept of IT governance comes into the picture. For those of you working in such organizations, you'll probably have an experience of this, right? Uh, there are a lot of IT governance models out there following different methodologies. For those of you in service management, you know ITIL. Okay, that's something that you're probably familiar with by now. For those of you who are really doing development work, I mean, there are a lot of governance models that are in place, a lot of methodologies out there. And one thing that ensures alignment of the systems with the strategy is the idea of having critical success factors. And when we talk about critical success factors, this pertains more to the business rather than to the system or to the technical side of things. So we don't see CSFs that are technical in nature. I mean, we would probably see one or two maybe, but more often than not, your CSFs would have to be something that's related to the business, like maybe improving profit or improving turnaround time or improving market scope or maybe decreasing organizational attrition. I mean, these are things that you'd want to consider, okay, that your information systems would always look out for, right? You don't want your information systems to just simply be, you know, it was built just for the heck of it, right? They really have to impact the business significantly. Now, for economic feasibility, so what do we mean by this? Well, it's an assessment of the cost and benefits. So obviously the monetary side of the system. But when we look at the economic feasibility, we take a look at all the alternatives available and we select the ones that gives the best value. Now, more often than not, it's not about having the least cost, right? And which is why and this is particularly true in government contracts, especially the Philippines. You see, our procurement law requires that government chooses the least costly option. But one way to actually circumvent that, to ensure that the quality is established, is that whenever they request for proposals, the requirements are like very, very rigorous, right? Because this ensures that no matter what happens, the minimum requirements will still be met. Okay? So you eliminate the variability in terms of the benefits by making sure that you require everyone to deliver the same set of benefits, so that all that is left would be cost, measuring them or comparing them in terms of costs. But that's for government, and sometimes, for private sector organizations, that's not usually the case. Probably uh, management, or maybe those in charge of procurement, don't really know what they really want or what they really need, right? So it tends to be a little bit vague at the early parts. So in which case, the vendors, the service providers, would compete both at the level of costs and the level of benefits that can be reaped from the solution. And definitely, when you look at economic feasibility, you always want to look, okay, is the cost worth it relative to the benefits? Okay? Or will I just suffer having to have incurred costs more, as opposed to me taking advantage or capitalizing the benefits coming from the implementation of the system? So these are examples. Okay, this is not a comprehensive list, but it's a good grocery list to look into. So you assess both the cost and the benefits. You don't look at them independently from one another. It's good that you draw them up separately. But once you have a list of costs and benefits that you should be considering, then you combine them, and then you make your analysis. Okay, you make your comparisons. So obviously, what are the examples that are typically considered? Well, purchasing the software. If it's an off-the-shelf solution, okay, how much would it cost? Um, Things like hardware. I mean, will there be hardware involved as well? Do I need to buy specific equipment? Okay, you could also consider that. What about training costs? Okay, does uh, will that be very expensive, or will that something that can be managed? Okay, or is the system something intuitive that you don't really need to spend too much on training? Okay, will I need to do incidental changes in my other existing systems for them to work? So integration. Okay, uh, and then you take a look also at the other benefits. Will there be better data quality? Will there be a reduction in your maintenance? Will there be a reduction in your inventory if you're doing manufacturing? Okay, will your revenue increase? Will your sales increase? So these are things that you would typically take a look into. Okay, depending on the objective that you want to happen, not everything that's listed here would be something that you have to consider, right? But the message here is that you have to take a look at both of them. You have to take a look both at the cost and the benefit side. Okay, and after you've drawn up all the possible costs and benefits, then you make the matching, okay, and the analysis. Now, the third type of feasibility is technical feasibility. Okay, so it evaluates to what degree the proposed solutions will work as required, and whether the right people and tools are available to implement the solution. Alright, well, this is typical assessment that you would encounter in traditional or fundamental project management, right? You obviously want to make sure that the solution does it really uh, address the problem that you want to solve, okay? And do you have the right people? Do you have the right resources to be able to do that? So that really falls under the umbrella of the usual PM discipline, right? But that's one of the things, only one of four at least, that we have to consider as far as feasibility goes. Okay, uh, essentially in technical feasibility, the question that you want to ask is, will it work? Will the solution theoretically work? Right? And going back to that idea of project management, it's rare that project managers would have to consider organizational feasibility. Okay, sometimes they might think of economic feasibility, but only if the project manager would have a deep business acumen, right? I mean, you don't expect the project managers, in theory, right, that they have a good understanding of the organization, that they have a good understanding of the culture or the objectives of the company. That's typically relegated to your consultant, right? And they're the ones who normally try to propose it, no, or package the story so that everything works for them in those areas. But for the project manager, that's really not the concern. The concern of the project manager typically is, I have the scope, I have what the idea of what needs to be done, I deliver it. Okay, that's the usual delineation between the consultant and the PM. Okay. But nevertheless, when you are actually considering implementing a new system, all these things have to be taken in tandem, right? So both the organizational, the technical, okay, and the economic feasibility. And later we'll talk about the operational. So in technical feasibility, we look at performance. Obviously, will it work? Okay, I mean, if it doesn't work, why would you want to implement it, right? You also want to look at availability or reliability. Will it last for a long time, or do I expect that I have to keep on changing or developing new systems every 6 months? Security. Will I be able to defend against intruders? Data integration or data quality. Okay. Or will my system actually be able to support decision making? So those are the considerations that are important when you consider technical feasibility. But there are many other items or many other dimensions, technical dimensions that you can consider. But these are the typical ones that you consider under technical feasibility. Lastly, operational feasibility. So this is an assessment of how the new system will affect the daily working practices within the organization. So in this case, normally the operational feasibility would be the realm of maybe your process managers, okay, process engineers, your those who've perhaps studied a little bit of industrial engineering or even service management. This is something that's also within the realm of service management. No? So in a way, the question that's asked here is the system workable on a day-to-day basis? Okay. Uh, and remember, I mean, when we talk about feasibility, this is all in theory, right? You still don't have the benefit of of getting actual data. So this is all theoretical. No, this is all okay. Mental imagination, right? And yet you understand that when you talk about feasibility, it's never just the technical. It's always everything around it as well. Okay, so this is not either or, right? It's either you do A or do B. No, no. I mean, you have to do A, B, C, D. Okay, in this case, you have to consider four areas. So yeah, this is a good summary. I mean, I'll give you time to take a look at it. But what's the idea here? The idea here is that when you're doing initiation work, it's quite important that you don't simply look at one dimension, but you also take a look at everything about the organization. And again, I repeat, as what I've alluded at the start, project initiation is a step or a phase in every project development project that that is often taken for granted, right? Some of you might have experienced this. Perhaps your best experience of initiation is just a kickoff meeting, and that's it. But nobody really has done the necessary due diligence. Or maybe there was an attempt to do some due diligence, but maybe it would have only covered on the technical or maybe on the economic. But very rare, and you'd only see that in experienced consultants, or there where they also consider both the organizational and even the operational feasibility. So, um, nevertheless, I mean, this is not to accuse or blame those who've only looked at it before from a technical standpoint or from a technical and economic standpoint alone, right? I mean, you just know what you know, right? Or you don't know what you don't know. But in any case, Now that you know, I mean, now that you know, when you're starting, or if you're even remotely considering on starting a new system, do spend the effort and the time to assess, okay, the feasibility of the project, whether it does make sense to have that system, and whether along the way that's something that's worthwhile. Okay. Um, so the last topic for today, we'll talk about risk management. Okay. So here, when you assess something, and let's let's say that, okay, out of the four feasibilities, okay, all of them you've determined that it is organizationally feasible, that it is technically feasible, that it's economically feasible, that it's operationally feasible. Okay, you've done the feasibility. Okay, now the thing here is that what you need to consider now is, if I'm going to roll out that project, as I'm rolling out that project, what are the chances that things get derailed because of things that I've encountered during the implementation of the project? Okay, and that's where risk management comes in. So the idea here is that you want to anticipate the future risks of an information system and to put in place measures to counter or eliminate these risks. So actually, in this case, this can also pertain to risks after you're done implementing the project. For example, if the reason why you want to implement a project is due to a change in law, okay, the question that you want to ask yourselves here is that, is it possible that sometime in the future the law will change, or the law will have some variations or additional amendments that would really require a significant change in the system, or making the current system obsolete? Okay, so that's also part of risk management. So you have to understand, okay, is the change going to be stable in one way or the other? If it's not, then you have to put some sort of countermeasures in place. Okay. Now, what are the typical domains of risk management? Well, you take a look at the commercial and legal relationships. Okay, so especially if you are intending to involve a vendor, okay, if you're buying a software upfront, like off the shelf, or if you're going to get licenses from an existing software company, well, you take a look at the commercial or legal relationships. Or even if you're going to outsource the development, you may want to ask, is this organization going to last long, or are they like fly by night companies wherein after they develop the system, I can no longer reach out to them? Okay, so that's something you want to look into. Next would be economic circumstances, especially for projects that tend to run for a very long time. So you would want to consider the costs during the course of the project. Okay, is it going to be something that is sustainable from a financial point of view? Would I have the funds to be able to support the implementation of the project? Also, after the project has been implemented, will I expect to spend more for maintenance? Okay, or occasional updates or upgrades to the existing system. Okay, can I afford that? Okay, so that's something you want to look into. Human behavior. Okay, of course, this is in relation to culture. Okay, will the key users especially be using it? Okay, or will they rebel against it to the point that they'll probably not use it anymore, making your system useless, right? Like some sort of a white elephant, right? Or political circumstances. Okay, okay. Dynamics within the company or even external to the company. Okay, technology or technical issues. I mean, we see this a lot in enterprise softwares, right? Sometimes they have emerging technologies coming into the picture. So, will your current system still support the newer technologies? No. Or if you've been used to making use of an old technology, if you move, excuse me, if you move to to another newer technology, will you still have the benefit of backward compatibility, for example? Well, other risks, types of risk, could be management activities and controls. Okay, senior management. If there's going to be a change in senior management, will it be supported still? Okay, or will the new management team introduce a new system? Okay, there are times that it's like that, right? Sometimes it becomes a flavor of the month type of thing. And lastly, the other risk category here would be individual activities. Okay, these are many, that are scattered around. It's so hard to aggregate them very well. Okay, but those are still risks. Okay, so that's the end of our session for today. So, are there any questions with the topic on initiation or initiating systems development? Anyone? Okay.